Hi friends, it's Mrs. Mayo in your Garden of Learning, and I really miss you. And I thought it would be fun for us to spend some time together in the garden. You might have seen me on videos that I've been recording books, but those are mostly for the little ones. I thought that we could share a story together. Seed Folks. It's a book I tend to start in the beginning of the year, and for some reason we get busy and I've never finished it. And it's a pretty long, it's a chapter book, but I love this story. Do you remember I read a few chapters in the beginning of the year for my 5th graders? And this book is special to me because it was my Megan's, and in 5th grade she read it. Well, actually we read it together. We belong to a mother-daughter book club, and it's just been one of my favorite books. So if you're ready, you want to get comfortable, get all cozy, I'm going to start the Seed Folks. And I have a lot of competition with the hummingbirds because I'm right by the butterfly habitat. In fact, a little Anna hummingbird was right there a minute ago. So you'll probably hear them, and you might even see them pop in and out. She's back. Okay, are you ready? Seed Folks by Paul Fleischman. And it was written for his mother and father. I'll just show you the one picture in the beginning of the chapter because it's not a picture book, but so that's Kim. I stood before our family altar. It was dawn. No one else in the apartment was awake, and I stared at my father's photograph, his thin, stern face, lips latched tight, his eyes peering permanently to the right. I was 9 years old and still hoped that perhaps his eyes might move, might notice me. The candles and the incense sticks lit the day before to mark his death anniversary had burned out. The rice and meat offered him were gone, and after the evening feast, past midnight, I'd been awakened by my mother's crying. My oldest sister had joined in. My own tears had then come as well, but for a different reason. I turned from the altar, I tiptoed to the kitchen and quietly drew a spoon from a drawer. I filled my lunch thermos with water and reached into our jar of dried lima beans, and then I walked outside to the street. The sidewalk was completely empty. It was Sunday, early in April. An icy wind teetered trash cans and turned my cheeks to marble. In Vietnam, we had no weather like that. Here in Cleveland, people called it spring. I walked half a block, then crossed the street and reached the vacant lot. I stood tall and scouted. No one was sleeping on the old couch in the middle. I never entered a lot before, or wanted to. I did so now, picking my way between tires and trash bags, and I nearly stepped on 2 rats gnawing and froze. And then I told myself I must show my bravery. I continued farther and chose a spot far from the sidewalk in hidden view by a rusty refrigerator. I had to keep my project safe. I took out my spoon and began to dig. The snow had melted, but the ground was hard. After much work, I finished 1 hole, and then a second, and then a third. I thought about how my mother and sisters remembered my father, and they knew his face from every angle, and held in their fingers the feel of his hands. I had no such memories to cry over. I'd been born 8 months after he died. Worse, he had no memories of me. When a spirit hovered over our altar, did it even know who I was? I dug 6 holes. All his life in Vietnam, my father had been a farmer. Here, our apartment house had no yard, but in that vacant lot, he would see me. He would watch my beans break ground and spread, and would notice with pleasure their pods growing plump. He would see my patience and my hard work, and I would show him that I could raise plants as he had. I would show him that I was his daughter. My class had sprouted lima beans in paper cups the year before. I now placed a bean in each of the holes. I covered them up, pressing the soil down firmly with my fingertips. I opened my thermos and watered them all. And I vowed to myself that those beans would thrive. Chapter 2, and this one is about Anna. I do love to sit and look out the window. Why do I need TV when I have 48 apartment windows to watch across the vacant lot and a sliver of Lake Erie? I've seen history out this window, so much. I was 4 when we moved here in 1919. The fruit seller's cart and coal wagons were pulled down the street by horses back then. I used to stand just here and watch the coal brought up by the handsome lad from Groza, the village my parents were born in. Gibb Street was mainly Romanians back then, and it was adio, goodbye, in all the shops when you left. The Romanians started leaving. They weren't the first or the last. This has always been a working class neighborhood. Do you see the Annas flying over me? It's like a cheap hotel. You stay until you've got enough money to leave. A lot of Slovaks and Italians moved in next, then Negro families in the Depression. Gibb Street became the line between the blacks and the whites, like a border between countries. I watched it happen through this very window. I lived over in Cleveland Heights for 18 years, and then I moved back in to take care of my parents. That border moved too. Most of all the whites left. Then the steam mills and factories closed, and everybody left. Like rats. Buildings abandoned, men with no work, drinking from 9 to 5, down there in the lot. Always the sirens. People killing each other. Now I see families from Mexico and Cambodia and countries I don't even know. 12 people sometimes in one apartment. The languages in the shops and on the street have changed. These new people leave when they can, just like the others. I'm the only one saying, it's so, staying and staring out the same window. This spring I looked out and I saw something strange. Down in the lot, a little black-haired girl hiding behind that refrigerator. She was working at the dirt and looking around suspiciously all the time. Then I realized she was burying something. I never had children of my own, but I seen enough in that lot to know that she was mixed up in something she shouldn't be. And after 20 years typing for the parole department, I just about knew what she buried. Drugs most likely, or money, or a gun. The next moment she disappeared like a rabbit. I thought of calling up the police, and then I saw her there the next morning. And I decided I'd solve this case myself. We had a long spell of rain then. I didn't set eyes on her once. And then the weather turned warm and I saw her twice more, always in the morning on her way to school. She was crouched down with her back to me, so I couldn't see just what she was doing. My curiosity was like a fever inside of me. Then one morning she was there, glancing about, and she looked straight up at this window. I pulled my head back behind the curtain. I have a little competition with the turkeys. Can you hear them? They miss you guys. I wasn't sure if she'd seen me. If she had, she wouldn't leave her treasure buried long. Then I knew I'd have to dig it up before she did. I waited an hour after she left. Then I took an old butter knife and my cane and hobbled down all 3 flights of stairs. I worked my way through that awful jungle of junk and finally came to her spot. I stooped down. It was wet there and easy digging. I hacked and dug, but didn't find anything except for a large white bean. I tried a new spot and I found another, and then a third. Then the truth of it slapped me full in the face. I said to myself, what have you done? 2 beans had roots. I knew I had done them harm. I felt like I'd read through her secret diary and ripped out a page without meaning to. I laid those beans right back in the ground as gently babies, and then I patted the soil as smooth as could be. The next morning she was back. I peeked around the curtain. She didn't look up or give any sign that she noticed something wrong. I could see her clearly this time. She reached a hand into her school bag, and then she pulled out a jar, unscrewed the lid, and poured out water onto the ground. That afternoon, I bought some binoculars. Chapter 3, Wendell. My phone doesn't ring much, which suits me fine. That's how I got the news about our boy. Shot dead like a dog in the street. And the word last year about my wife's car wreck. I can't hear a phone and not jerk inside. When Anna called, I was still asleep. Phone calls that wake me up are the worst. "Get up here quick," she says. I live on the ground floor and watch out for her a little. We're the only white people left in the building. I ran upstairs. I could tell it was serious. I pray I wouldn't find her dead. When I got there, she looked perfectly fine. She dragged me over to the window. "Look down there," she says. "They're dying." "What?" I yelled back. "The plants," she said. I was mad. She gave me some binoculars and told me all about the Chinese girl. I found the plants and got them in focus. There were 4 of them in a little row. Still little. They were wilted. Leaves flopped flat on the ground. "What are they?" she asked. Some kind of beans. I grew up on a farm in Kentucky, but she planted them way too early. She's lucky those little seeds even came up. But they did, send Anna, and it's up to us to save them. It was a weekend in May and hot. You'd thought those beans were hers. They needed water, especially in that heat. She said the girl hadn't come in 4 days. Sick probably, or gone out of town. Anna had twisted her ankle and couldn't manage the stairs, so she pointed to a pitcher. "Fill that up and soak them good. Quick now." School janitors take too much bossing all week to listen to an extra helping on the weekends. I stared at her for one long moment, then took my time about filling the pitcher. I walked down the stairs and into the lot and found the girl's plants. You don't plant beans until the weather's hot. Then I saw what had kept her seeds from freezing. The refrigerator in front of them had bounced the sunlight back on the soil, heating it up like an oven. I bent down and gave the dirt a feel. It was hard-packed and light-colored. I studied the plants. Leaves shaped like spades in the deck of cards. Definitely beans. I scraped up a ring of dirt around the first plant to hold the water in and any rain that fell, and I picked up the pitcher and poured the water slowly. Then I heard something move and spun around. The girl was there, stone still, 10 feet away, holding her own water jar. She hadn't seen me behind the refrigerator, and she looked afraid for her life. Maybe she thought I'd jump up and grab her. I gave her a smile and showed her that I was just giving her plants some water. This made her eyes go even bigger. I stood up slowly and backed away, and I smiled again. She watched me leave. We never spoke one word. I walked back there that evening and checked on the beans. They picked themselves up and were looking fine. I saw that she made a little circle of dirt around the other 3 plants. Out of nowhere, the words from the Bible came into my head. "And a little child shall lead them." I didn't know why at first, and then I did. There's plenty about my life I can't change. I can't bring the dead back to life on this earth. I can't make the world loving and kind. Can't change myself into a millionaire. But a patch of ground in this trashy lot, I can change that. Can change it big. Better to put my time into that than moaning about the other all day. That little grammar school girl showed me that. The lot had buildings on 3 sides, and I walked around and picked myself out a spot that wouldn't be shaded too much. I dragged the garbage off to the side and tossed out the biggest pieces of broken glass. I looked over my plot, squatted down, and fingered the soil a while. That Monday, I brought a shovel home from work. Chapter 4, Gonzalo. The older you are, the younger you get when you move to the United States. They don't teach you that equation in school. Big brain Mr. Smoltz, my 8th grade math teacher, hasn't even heard of it. It's not in Gateway to Algebra. It's Garcia's equation. I'm the Garcia. 2 years after my father and I moved here from Guatemala, I could speak English. I learned it on the playground and watching lots of TV. Don't believe what people say. Cartoons make you smart. But my father, he worked all day in a kitchen with Mexicans and Salvadorians. His English was worse than a kindergartner's. He would only buy food at the bodega down the block. Outside of there, he lowered his eyes and tried to get by on mumbles and smiles. He didn't want strangers to hear his mistakes. So he used me to make phone calls and to talk to the landlady and to buy things in stores where you had to use English. He got younger and I got older. Then my younger brothers and mother and Tio Juan, her uncle, came north and joined us. Tio Juan was the oldest man in his pueblo, but here he became a little baby. He'd been a farmer, but here he couldn't work. He couldn't sit out in the plaza and talk. There aren't any plazas here. And if you sit out in public, some gang driving by might use you for target practice. He couldn't understand TV, so he wandered around the apartment all day, in and out of rooms, talking to himself just like a kid in diapers. One morning he wandered outside and down the street. My mother practically fainted. He doesn't speak Spanish, just an Indian language. I finally found him standing in front of a beauty parlor, staring through the glass at a woman with a dryer over her head. He must have wondered what a weird planet he'd moved to. I led him home, holding his hand, the way you would with a 3-year-old. Since then, I'm supposed to babysit him after school. Oh my goodness, can you hear all the turkeys? One afternoon, I was watching TV, getting smart on the Brady Bunch. Suddenly, I looked up and he was gone. I checked the halls on all 5 floors of the apartment. I ran to the street. He wasn't in the bodega or in the pawn shop. I called his name. Tia! Imagining my mother's face when she found out he'd fallen through a manhole or been run over. I turned the corner, looking for the white straw hat he always wore. 2 blocks down, I spotted it. I flew down the sidewalk and found him standing in the front of the vacant lot, making gestures to a man with a shovel. I took his hand, but he pulled me through the trash into the lot. I recognized the man with the shovel. He was a janitor at my old school. He had a little garden planted, different shades of green, and leaves were coming up in rows. Tio Juan was smiling and trying to tell him something, but the man couldn't understand him and finally went back to digging. I turned Tio Juan around and led him home. That night he told my mother all about it. She was the only one who could understand him. When she got home from work the next day, she asked me to take him back there. I did. He studied the sun, then the soil. He felt it. He smelled it, then actually tasted it. He chose a spot not too far from the sidewalk where my mother changed buses. She'd gone into a store, where my mother changed buses. She'd gone into a store and bought him a trowel and 4 packets of seed. I cleared the trash. He turned the soil. I wish we were farther from the street, and I was praying that none of my friends or girlfriends or enemies saw me. Tio Juan didn't even notice people. He was totally wrapped up in the work. He showed me exactly how far apart the rows should be and how deep. He couldn't read the words on the seed packets, but he knew from the pictures what seeds were inside. He poured them into his hand and smiled. He seemed to recognize them like old friends. Watching him carefully, sprinkling them into the troughs he made, I realized that I didn't know anything about growing food and that he knew everything. I stared at his busy fingers and then his eyes. They were focused, not far away or confused. He changed from a baby back into a man. I think this is chapter 5. Leona. And you know you don't have to listen to this whole story at one time. Mama believed in doctors, but not Granny. Not even if they were black. No, ma'am. I grew up in her house back in Atlanta, and she drank down a big cup of goldenrod tea every morning with a nutmeg floating in it, and declared she didn't need no other medicine. Dr. Bates tried to sell her his iron pills and told her straight out that the tea of hers would raise her blood pressure and burst her heart. He passed away that very same summer. Next doctor said it would give her brain fever. He died on his 50th birthday, I believe right during the party. Had him a real nice funeral later. Granny lived to 99 by her account. She kept a scrapbook with the obituaries of all the doctors she outlived and could recite the list of names by heart like a chapter out of Genesis. We took to going to their funerals right regular over the years. She always laid some goldenrod on their graves. I was thinking about her one day, walking home from the grocery store on Gibbs Street. Then I came to the vacant lot and saw 3 people in different parts of it. I thought maybe they were looking for money. It turns out they had shovels, not metal detectors. When I saw they had little gardens going, I said to myself, I believe I'll plant a patch of goldenrod right there. There was a man standing and watching from the sidewalk and a girl looking down out of a window. They were probably lots of folks who wanted to grow something just like me. And then I studied all the trash on the ground. Don't know why anybody called that lot vacant. The garbage was piled high as your waist, some of it from the neighborhood and some dropped off by outside people. The ones who don't want to pay at the dump or got dangerous chemicals or think we're such slobs down here we won't mind another load of junk. We can't get City Hall to pick up our trash, but we got it delivered just fine. The smell's enough to curl up a crocodile's nose, especially in the summer. The gardeners had made some trails through it, but I knew precious few would join them until that mess was hauled away. Looking at it, I knew this wasn't a job for no wheelbarrow. This was a job for the telephone. I marched home. I got 2 kids in high school that has more guns than books. I know all about complaining to officials about such things that need changing. Next morning was Monday. At 9 o'clock, I drank me a tall glass of water. I knew I'd be having to say the same thing to 15 or 20 government folks. I put Miles on the CD and stretched out on the bed. Might as well be comfortable when you're on hold. Then I opened the phone book and started dialing. You ever watch a sax player close? They push the key down and way at the other end of the instrument something moves. That's what I was looking for, the key that would make that trash disappear. I tried the city of Cleveland, then the county, then the state of Ohio, and finally the U.S. government. 6.5 hours later, I found out the lot was owned by the city. But the people running Cleveland don't usually come down here unless they take a wrong turn on the freeway. You can't measure the distance between my block and City Hall in miles. Just the same day, I kept working on it. The next day. That Citizens Information Center told me to call the Public Health Department. They sent me to someone else. They're all trained to be slippery as snakes and to be out to lunch, to not return messages, and to keep folks on hold until they get gray and die. I had a feeling I was getting farther from the key I needed instead of closer. Then, on the 3rd day, I thought on it. When people talk to you on the phone, you're nothing but a voice. And when you're on hold, you're not even that. I had to make myself real to them. That morning, I took a bus downtown and walked into the public health department. Told all about the trash over and over again to this dolled up receptionist. Let her see me up close and personal and hear me loud and clear. She just told me to sit down with the others and to wait. I did. Then I opened the garbage bag that I'd picked up in the lot on my way. The smell that came out of it, it made you think of hog pens and maggots and kitchen scraps back when Nixon was president. It was amazing how quick people noticed it, including the receptionist. And even more amazing how quick I was called in to have a meeting with someone. I was definitely real to them now. I brought that bag along with me into the meeting to keep it that way. I think, is this 5, 6? I forget. Sam. I saw people on the sidewalk watching something. I crossed to them like a cat who smells herring. Men in jumpsuits from the jail, I think, were cleaning the lot. Unbelievable. The woman beside me told me the land was for anybody who wanted a garden. Even more unbelievable. The word paradise came out of my mouth without thinking. The woman looked at me strange. It's a hobby with me, studying words. I looked at the 3 walls surrounding the lot, then at the garden coming up, beautiful, planted there close to the sidewalk. Paradise comes from a Persian word. It means walled park. I told the woman that. This time she gave me a little smile. I smiled back. That's my occupation. You've seen fishermen mending the rips in their nets. That's what I do, only with people. I used to try to patch up the whole world. For 36 years, I worked for different groups, promoting world government, setting up conferences on pacifism, raising money, stuffing envelopes. Not that I've given up the fight. I've just switched battlefields from the entire planet to this corner of Cleveland. Sometimes I think I've actually had more effect on the world since I retired. What do? I smile at people, especially Black people and the ones from different countries. I get them looking up at me instead of down or off to the side. I start up conversations in lines and on the bus and with cashiers. People see I'm friendly, no matter what they've heard about whites or Jews. If I'm lucky, I get them talking to each other, sewing up the rips in the neighborhood. I hadn't had a garden since I was a kid. I wanted one now. Only this time, I was 78 to be exact, and in no condition to dig up the soil. So I hired a teenager, Puerto Rican, who said he knew where he could get a shovel. He knew he'd have to do a good job to be paid. He worked that soil until it flowed through your fingers like silk. I paid him well and offered him a row. He wanted to grow marijuana to sell, a real businessman. We discussed this. We finally compromised on pumpkins. After I explained how much he could probably get for them at Halloween, not to mention the advantages of staying out of jail. He was new to the neighborhood. We chatted back and forth, squatting there in the cool of the evening, planting our seeds. A few other people working, a robin singing out a strong song all the while. It seems to me that we were in true paradise, a small garden of Eden. In the Bible, though, there's a river in Eden. Here we had none. Not even a spigot anywhere close by. Nothing. People had to lug their own water in buckets or milk jugs or soda containers. Water is heavy as bricks. Trust me. And new seeds have to always be moist. And in all of June, it didn't rain but 4 days. The result, people were bent over, walking sometimes 3 or 4 blocks, a gallon jug in each hand, complaining all the time about the water. Mine, I had hauled by a 3rd grader with a wagon. The contest I started came later. Water aside, we had other problems. People in the garden told friends and relatives. The lot was big and there was plenty of room. But when newcomers joined, at least at the beginning, they could usually get a spot near people they knew. One Saturday, when the garden was fullest, I stood up a minute to straighten my back. And what did I see? With a few exceptions, the blacks on one side, the whites on the other, the Central American and Asians towards the back. The garden was a copy of the neighborhood. I guess I shouldn't have been surprised. A duck gives birth to a duckling, not a moose. Each group kept to itself, spoke its own language, and grew its own special crops. One man even put up a pole and flew the Filipino flag above his plot. Then there was garbage. A few brought up people in the buildings around the lot and still used it for a trash can. Just couldn't get out of the habit. They emptied their ashtrays out the window and tossed all sorts of stuff. One day a bottle came down like a meteor. A man picked it up and threw it back straight through the window it came out of. A minute later, 5 more flew out. Next, I thought to myself, some gunshots. Instead, thank God, it was only shouting. That crazy homeless man, the one who used to sleep on the broken down couch, he also missed the lot being a dump. He showed up, saw his couch had been taken, and started ripping out people's plants. The police had to come. Some people started worrying, looking ahead to ripe beans and tomatoes and thinking about strangers coming in. That week, a man put chicken wire around his garden 5 feet high, complete with a little gate and padlock. The week after, someone built a board fence. Then came the first keep out sign. Then the crowning achievement, Bob wired. God, who made Eden, also wrecked the Tower of Babel by dividing people. From paradise, the garden was turning back into Cleveland. Well, friends, I'm halfway through this book, and I think I'll stop here. We'll start next time with Virgil. I really loved being with you, and I hope we'll continue this. We'll do some projects in the garden together. I'll show you how to do them from here, and you can do them at home. But know that I'm so proud of all of you. I heard you're doing an awesome job with all your studies at home. I know this is a really hard time, so let's find moments of happiness. Be good to yourself, and until next time, I see you in the garden. Bye.